Welcome back to the Chaplain's Assistant Motor Pod, and I'm your host, Gary, and today we're going to take a look at the latest theatrical release for G.I. Joe, Snake Eyes G.I. Joe Origins. We're also going to take a look at something that's a little ninja related on the vehicle side of things. It's a little bit of a stretch, but trying to make it a little bit thematic for your listening pleasure today. This is episode 6, and I'm finally on my way home after being released from servitude from the M&M Mars Corporation. Apparently, my plane took me to Tokyo because either I don't know how to board at the airport, or the quickest way to America from the British Isles is over the North Pole and into Japan. I'm going to take in some of the sights from around here while I review Snake Eyes G.I. Joe Origins. On Friday the 23rd of July was opening night, the official opening night of Snake Eyes G.I. Joe Origins. And like a diehard G.I. Joe fan that I am, I went to see it. Saw it at my local theater, no 3D, no IMAX, just, a regular theater experience, sticky floors and all. Got there reasonably early, not a big crowd, and when I got into the theater, there were 22 minutes of previews and trailers. After that, there were still people strolling in, and it wasn't really that crowded. And that just meant that I was hoping to be pleasantly left alone to watch the movie. Even though, there were people next to me, and, some people just did decide to talk through asking their husbands, what's this movie about, and who's he, and stuff. That's a side, that's just the part of going to the theatrical experience. What that does tell me is that husbands were bringing their wives to watch a character that the wives really didn't know much about. That's a positive sign. Without any spoilers, and to summarize, it was, for me, a perfectly adequate G.I. Joe movie. Recently, I tried to rewatch The Rise of Cobra, and then I was going to rewatch Retaliation before going into the Snake Eyes movie. I got to start Rise of Cobra, couldn't finish it. I got about a half an hour in and I just tapped out. And then just because of work and just, coming home at night, I was just flat out exhausted. Most nights I didn't get a chance to catch Retaliation. If any comparisons are made to the other two movies, you can tell where one of them already is going to be. Based on, that Snake Eyes was definitely better than Rise of Cobra, infinitely more watchable. Retaliation, I can see myself wanting to watch Retaliation on some days over Snake Eyes, and vice versa. I could see some days I would rather watch Snake Eyes than Retaliation. That gives you an idea of where it's going. And I don't think Retaliation is bad either. Going into this movie, and this is a new imagining of Snake Eyes' beginning. I don't hold fast to that comic book origin. I love the canon. I love that universe of stories that Larry Hama has created, but I'm not held fast to that story outside of that medium. I do like other imaginings of G.I. Joe, but I leave my mind open to those other imaginings of a story that happens using G.I. Joe characters. Everything doesn't have to be what someone, especially in this case Larry Hama, has written before. My expectation going into the movie was to see a man forged by tragedy, somebody that persevered over that tragedy to become something better than he was. You get a little bit of that. The other question going into this is an origin story. So where are they going to start Snake Eyes' story, and where are they going to end the movie at in that period of Snake Eyes' story? Without spoiling anything, Lorenzo di Bonaventura did say certain things before the movie appeared about things that may be in a future G.I. Joe movie. So I'm not going to repeat that there in case you're listening to this portion before you see the movie. I knew we weren't going to get the full origin of Snake Eyes up until like that G.I. Joe issue number 1. We weren't going to get all of that. The other thing is, somebody might think that this movie is completely centered around the Rashikage clan and its relationship to Snake Eyes. Yet there's enough of Cobra in this movie to remind you that it is a G.I. Joe movie. You got a lot of centering of that story of Snake Eyes and the Rashikage clan. And then finally, I want to say just before, Henry Golding as Snake Eyes, Andrew Koji as Storm Joe, and Haruka Abe as Akiko. They did a great job acting the heck out of their roles. You could clearly tell that they knew the script, they knew the story, and they really made engaging characters with what they were given and how they were directed. I think those three really deserve a round of applause for what they gave to this movie. So with that all out of the way, pause right here, and I'm going to start reviewing the movie, and there's going to be spoilers. So pause here and then come back. So obviously the highlight of this movie are the three main characters, Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow, and Akiko. They're acting within the script that they had. They made their own choices believable for the characters they portrayed on screen. Akiko was really great at being the voice of reason for the Rashikage clan. Granny was entertaining, and Kenta was a decent villain, maybe a little generic-y. Ursula Corbera played the Baroness, and she did a great job when she had me to work with in the scene. I would say she was more devilish as the Baroness than previously played by Sienna Miller. It also helped that the Baroness was also her own independent character in the movie, rather than tied to the lead in maybe what would say a contrived manner. Samara Weaving played Scarlet, and she did her best work during the action scenes. And other supporting characters was Iko Huai as the Hard Master. When they used him, it was for action scenes, and he did well. And Peter Mensah as the Blind Mancer was also fine in like that stoic ninja master supporting role. Those two guys are in the movie, I'd say, enough, but I wouldn't have mind seeing more of them in the film, although maybe they didn't need to be in the film any more than they were. Scarlet and Baroness sometimes felt tacked on to the scenes that they were in. More so Scarlet, because there were times that it seemed Corbero was not given enough direction, other than like, okay, after, Henry Golding walks away, just stand there and look pompous and attractive. And at that point, she was doing her best, but the focus was on other characters. It just didn't work in those scenes. The two ladies, seemed like they were improvising and just not being directed well enough at that point by director Robert Schwenke. Samara Weaving had some of the worst lines in the movie, and also coupled with the lack of direction at the same time, or just misguided direction, some of that delivery felt cringy. However, one scene where it worked was she walks into Snake Eyes' room and she finds Snake Eyes talking to Akiko, and she gets really awkward, and it actually felt at that point believable. Good scene. Don't know if it was supposed to be played that way, but it worked. Other thing that I liked was it was nice to see Larry Hama getting the cameo finally that he deserved. It was in a non-speaking role, and they used him solo, walking down an alleyway, basically as part of an establishing shot. It just felt not satisfying. because it would have been, I think, more meaningful for me as a fan, like the Stan Lee cameos. Have him, interact with the character in a one way or another, or just talk to himself. Just give him a speaking line. Also, just because he was walking down as an establishing shot, it just seemed to drag that shot. It like slowed the pace of the movie at that moment. It was like mixed emotions. And I know he supported the movie and stuff. It was just like, but it's just like, give the guy, throw the guy a bigger bone. Also, he said he was like a Yakuza boss in that shot. It could have just been any guy in a suit. Great to have the cameo, but just he needed more, or I needed more of him. Take it which way you want on that one. Getting back to the direction, so Schwenke was definitely focused on telling Snake Eyes' story, and he was doing it in a visual style that was more flamboyant than in past movies, but it fit the style of when they left Los Angeles to go to Tokyo. His style for Tokyo worked. The end credits, I wish what he did in the end credits, he did even more throughout the film. Schwenke used some CGI, probably because the script called for some fantastic beasts, and they were unimpressive. They felt like they were 13, 14 years old. With a movie like this, and especially with what you're trying to do for the brand, you got to go big or go home. And it just felt like they didn't go big enough. The CGI is the more fantastical elements of this story. Because the movie, for the most part, was very grounded, these CGI elements to tell these fantastic elements pulled me out of the movie, which felt unnatural. I get that G.I. Joe doesn't need to be this, military-based action movie all the time. G.I. Joe has always had elements of sci-fi and fantasy as part of it. But in this case, I felt like with what the rest of the story was trying to tell, but it just felt off. And as part of the CGI, there was this magical MacGuffin crystal that was very convenient for the plot during the third act. For the first parts of the movie, they call it, this sacred ancient weapon or something with deep symbolic meaning. And then when you discover that it's like a magical meteorite that has convenient abilities like magical incineration, or it can deflect bullets. So it's an energy weapon of some kind. It was just too convenient. Something else could have been done. On the flip side, it almost felt like it was one of the three elements to power a device called the mass device. Now, I know they were trying to launch this new G.I. Joe franchise, and everybody's trying to be the MCU, so I'm going to make comparisons to the MCU. If you're trying to come up with something like the Infinity Stones in G.I. Joe, you're going to use the elements for the mass device. That's cool. As a longtime fan, I'm seeing that. I could be wrong. Heck, I can't read minds, and half the time I'm wrong anyway. Just ask my wife. It is what it is. It's in the movie. The plot revolves around Snake Eyes being, this unlucky guy. Snake Eyes, you roll the dice. Snake Eyes, that's the bad roll. That's what they're using it. They're using it as the hand, the dice. And when I was tweeting about this movie and defending it and stuff, I would use Snake Eyes, the dice. Everybody else is using the snake emoji and the eyes emoji. It's like, literally, it's the dice. They did that in the Doc Venom storyline when they're playing craps after Quinn and him break out of jail. To me, that was like a no-brainer, and then that's the whole thing for the movie. They start the movie with Golding's character's, Snake Eyes' dad, getting murdered by a guy, and he rolls the dice, and yep, you die, bam. So Snake Eyes vows vengeance, and then he has this great aimless plan to just beat up people in street fights for money to gain vengeance and gain the knowledge of who his father's killer was. Kind of a haphazard plan for some of this to be so focused on finding your father's killer. So he's aimless. Yeah, but, generally if you're focused enough, you're not aimless. Through this whole thing, Kenta recruits him in the Yakuza. And, here you join the Yakuza, you're going to fight. And it's like, okay, it's great. Finally, Snake Eyes is gaining, focus. Okay. And then he refuses to kill Storm Shadow. And as repayment for sparing his life, Snake Eyes is welcomed into the compound of the Arashikage clan. Snake Eyes offers him this, you can fight alongside me, you can be part of us, and it's great. What we later find out, that's Kenta's ruse to get the MacGuffin. Also, once you learn that, you start seeing Snake Eyes through this different lens where he's really the antagonist of his own movie, which doesn't make him sympathetic at all. You understand why he's doing it. I'm finding my dad's murderer. Also, with making, Storm Shadow, Andrew Koji, he's eventually going to turn into Storm Shadow, but you're making this guy into a sympathetic character. This movie is doing more for me like Andrew Koji's story arc more. This movie could have really been, for the most part, Storm Shadow G.I. Joe Origins, because I'm rooting for Storm Shadow halfway through this movie. I'm not rooting for Snake Eyes. I don't like Snake Eyes. And that shouldn't be what you're trying to do when you're setting up a hero franchise. It's also, halfway through the movie, you're not seeing Snake Eyes be Snake Eyes. You're being Snake Eyes being a bad guy. And that's not, like I said, if you're doing an origin story, you want to see the good guy, or you want to see the character mostly transition to at that point. And then at the end of the movie, you want the guy to be who you want him to be. But here they're spreading it out, which has positives and negatives. But I think for what they're trying to do to bring to a larger audience, this is a slower burn, and I don't think people really respond to that. And I wasn't. Not the way I want to believe who Snake Eyes is at his core. He's just so focused. He doesn't care about other people. But moving through the movie, Snake Eyes has these 3 trials. It's pretty clear during the first 2, what he needs to do and what he's going to have to change within himself to survive the last trial. The 3rd trial is throwing him in a pit with giant CGI anacondas. At this point in the movie, when he's first thrown in there, he's not, he's going to die. And then the first time one of the 3 main characters, Akiko, makes this thing, this woman who is spouting like a Arashikage, for lack of a better term, dogma, she jumps into the pit to save Snake Eyes because he's failing. He's going to die. And that move, number one, I didn't really see Snake Eyes really endear himself to her. She endeared herself to him, like as a big sister role, I would say, not really romantic. But also, that's like a little bit of, that's the time in the movie when the characters start playing against the type that they've been feeding you up to this, to get to this 3rd act. She saves Snake Eyes. She gets banished. He gets banished. And, before he leaves, he finally betrays Storm Shadow to steal the MacGuffin. And that's the kickoff to the 3rd act. He races back, finds out his dad's killer was Cobra, and he realized he's been a pawn in Cobra's game for much longer than anybody realized. So he's part of this long con. It's a little foreshadowed by the Baroness in an earlier scene. That I thought was good. And then he spares his dad's killer. And that's the moment in the film when Snake Eyes begins the redemption. But the movie's almost over. And everything now is going to happen quick because it goes into the car chase scene at night. And everything is happening fast. The cycle of revenge is broken. Now he's a good guy. Storm Shadow hates his guts. Now it brings you back to the compound. Kenta comes back to the compound and he starts blowing everything up with a space rock. And Kenta's Yakuza also get the jump on Cobra. And then, so for reasons, Scarlet, who is in the movie, joins in and is like, hey, Baroness, you look like your ass is getting whooped. You want to team up so we can get out of here? And, Baroness is like, yeah, for now. It was contrived, I guess. Finally, to get the PG-13 rating, Baroness lets slip the F-bomb and ducks out, and Storm Shadow tries to use the magical space rock to kill Kenta. That's a no-no. That'll come back. And then Snake Eyes hunt down Kenta and drags him into the pit of Anaconda. The Anaconda eat Kenta, and then they go back to Snake Eyes, and then they realize he's pure of heart. And because of the laws of the Rashikage, if the giant CGI Anaconda doesn't eat you, you're pure of heart and you can be in a Rashikage. But you don't get second chances. That's a big one with me, because very quickly the follow-up and the third act happens over the course of a night. The whole battle at the Rashikage compound happens from essentially dusk to dawn, and now it's like morning, and they're having the remaining good guys are all in a little powwow in the dojo. Granny tells Storm Shadow, you can't be, you're not going to be leader of this clan anymore. The clan will die with me. All right, so you got this clan for generations, right? And you don't have a successor plan. What happens? That doesn't seem well thought out. That pisses off Storm Shadow, and he leaves. So this whole third act, over the battle, Snake Eyes' redemption, Storm Shadow breaking the sacred vow, somebody that's devoted their life, he's told he will no longer be able to, serve as the clan leader. He'll never be a clan master, and his grandmother will be the last one. He leaves. He just straight up leaves. But now Snake Eyes is all back in the good graces. It's like, this guy betrayed you. What the heck is going on? Oh, but remember, the CGI Anaconda decided not to eat him the second time around, so he's a good guy now. After that, it's really just tying up the loose ends of the storyline. Scarlet approaches Snake Eyes. Here's a dossier on your dad. Your dad was a G.I. Joe. Okay, so like any good G.I. Joe story, you got 6 degrees of Snake Eyes. This is where we start with Snake Eyes' dad was G.I. Joe, and because he was a kid, his dad kept him completely off grid, so you never find out Snake Eyes' name. Okay, a little more, plot convenience. Again, and when Scarlett's telling him all this, she's kind of like awkward about it, and then she implies that Snake Eyes can become a G.I. Joe. Hold on, G.I. Joe, again, it's the movie verse where G.I. Joe is an international group. Aren't they all supposed to be soldiers? But this guy that was doing street fights up until like a week or so ago, now he can be a Joe too. And the Rashikage give him his own outfit, complete with Rashikage branding. It just really... the ending just gets a little frustrating for me at that point. It's just rushed, and things start to become a little too convenient. G.I. Joe isn't like a fraternity. You can't be a legacy to join G.I. Joe. He's not a soldier. He's just a fighter. Snake Eyes finally, at the very end of the movie, dons his signature visored look, gets on his street bike, and goes after Tommy. And then finally there's a mid-credit scene where Tommy's on a plane. He's finally approached by the Baroness to join Cobra. So you have this Origins movie where your hero of the movie doesn't turn into the hero till the third act, and he's still at the end of the movie isn't exactly the character that you got in the other movies. Stops short of that satisfying what you want at the end, but it still is an end of the story that ties everything up and leaves things open like a franchise movie should. The biggest letdown for me was Snake Eyes didn't have that central moral center. He was so focused on revenge. This is a guy I'm supposed to be rooting for in the movie. I should definitely see Storm Shadow's descent. And like I said, Andrew Koji did an amazing job with him. Andrew Koji, of the 3 characters, really did, I think, the best job. But maybe it's also because he was written the best. And Henry Golding did very good with the stuff he did, with the stuff he had, but I didn't like with what they gave him. The other thing, too, that I would have hoped from the comic was that, Snake Eyes, when he joined the clan, there'd be more training, where, like in the comic, he joins the clan and he's a very dangerous soldier, but he's unfocused. They really focus not so much on fighting training as much as just the focusing of in martial arts would be the chi. I get it, but I felt there should be more there. Very glossed over when they're talking about the Arashikage mindset. It was more like a holistic approach rather than the finger knits that was used in the comics to put the ninja into the trance that would turn him into an ultimate killer. But as a positive side, I didn't mind the shaky cam so much in the action scenes. I can see where some people were, especially the opening fight scene. I liked them. Some of the cuts were quick, but they weren't disappointing. Finally, to get to the final point, I'm going to use the Pina Comics family grading scale of 0 to 5 shuriken, and half and quarter shuriken is allowed. And I'm going to say, this movie is a solid 3.5 shuriken. It's a decent movie, and it has rewatchability. Being part of the G.I. Joe universe helps it for me, but taking my love of G.I. Joe out, that's why it's a 3.5. Absolutely, the script was the weakest, and the directing should have been stronger in places, and I think some different choices should have been made with the focus on the story. But the biggest thing that really hurts it is making Snake Eyes not a hero for most of the movie, not making him likable. Their intention was to make a movie where kids all over want to be Snake Eyes, and I think the wrong message was sent. All right, now that I'm done with the movie, I'm going to take a look at this episode's vehicle spotlight, which is on the G.I. Joe 1985 Silver Mirage. Now, the Silver Mirage was first available in 1985 and was also available in 1986, and then it was discontinued, so it wasn't available on the 1987 year unless you were lucky enough to find it on clearance. Now, the Silver Mirage is essentially a street bike modeled as something a little bit more futuristic than the early 1980s street bike, import or Japanese motorcycle style. So if you're thinking early 1980s or mid 1980s Japanese motorcycles, if you think of your Yamaha, maybe your Honda Hurricane or your Kawasaki Ninja, and now you're thinking of what Hasbro was thinking as they designed the Silver Mirage. Now, the Silver Mirage is that wonderful metallic silver plastic which is brittle as it gets older. It has wonderful green accents for the suspension, the kickstand, the engine, the exhaust, the handlebars. Also on the sidecar, you got the missiles and the machine gun. Rubber tires, it has a fairing. It says turbo on the side, and overall, it's more of a model kit, I would say, than one of those durable G.I. Joe toys that you have lots of memories of. I've seen lots of parts pass through my hands for Silver Mirage, but very few complete, unbroken Silver Mirages. One of the things with assembly on these is if you didn't get the front tire and the rear tire matched up right, it looks very awkward. And not only does it not look awkward, the tires don't spin if they're in the wrong spots. I had somebody switch the spots on. I tried to swap the tires, but then I broke one of the locating pegs on the fairing. And then it was really easy that for my collection, one Silver Mirage was enough. Now, why is one Silver Mirage enough? You got this sidecar with its own windshield and headlamp of sorts, like the main bike. You got this machine gun cannon that sits atop that the character riding in the sidecar would be wielding or handling, and two missiles on the side. I actually think the sidecar, other than the fact that it has a street bike tire, is actually kind of cool. It's aerodynamic like the bike, and it fits overall. When it's connected, it doesn't look out of place as a sidecar on the bike. Now, the bike itself, twin disc brakes up front, one rear disc. It has a single swing arm and shaft drive, and I say that because there's no chain. So I'm going to assume, which is a bad word sometimes, that it's going to be using a shaft drive. You do have some things that look like spokes in the center of the rear disc. You could think of that as the gear for that. And like I said, it's a single swing arm, which would become more popular later on street bikes in, let's say, the 90s and 2000s. It's pretty faithful. You got a single exhaust that connects to the back of the engine. The engine is laid down, obviously as a toy, but as like looking at the model kit lens, because this thing's so dainty anyway, it looks like a single piston. In the back of the fairings and in front of the fairings looks like it would be water cooled. But you look at the front of the engine, you have those air-cooled fins. It's a little contradictory, but it's there, and I'm here for it. I love it still for what it is. The handlebars don't stick out like regular handlebars, like on your bicycle or motorcycle. They stick straight up. A lot of times I would say, oh, that's not good. But in this case, it works because you don't have articulated wrists on your G.I. Joe figures. Unlike the Ram, where you just put the hands into the fairing and they just disappear, so you can imagine that your character turned their wrist. At this one, at least they can hold on to something. Positioning a figure on this, or up to 3 figures, can be a little tricky. It's always a little bit harder to get your 3 3/4 Joe to sit down on the seat, feet on the pegs, and crouch over. I use the number 41 O-rings, so they do get over there, and it works to an extent. And then also you have the other accessory part of this bike. Aside from the really tiny missiles on the side of the bike or the kickstand on the bottom of the bike, you also have the backpack fairing for your character riding the bike, or maybe the guy riding, pardon the term, but riding bitch would wear. So this can transport up to 3 guys on a bike. But if you got a guy in the back, I would think he would have a backpack on with ammo or something for the group. The 2 missiles on the back of the bike, I know why they're there. Playability. They light off. They're going to burn the back of somebody's right leg pretty good. You also have the gas fill on the gas tank, which seems wide open. It's nice that they left it open so you could, put like a nozzle or something in there. But for what this is doing, they should have had a cap there. Now the question is, who is driving the Silver Mirage? The Silver Mirage is an urban motorcycle. So this is a motorcycle that, for all of my intents and purposes, is not really suited in a military role. This is great for an undercover work. So like in Snake Eyes the movie, you'll have your ninja riding on the bikes. But who, other than, Snake Eyes or Storm Shadow as an independent Rashikage operator, riding the Silver Mirage, who else? Well, going with the undercover angle, you got Scarlet, Lady J, Chuckles. I could see Falcon, based on his characterization in G.I. Joe the movie, riding this. But in a combat role, this isn't going to be in the deserts. This isn't going to be going through a bombed out Iraq or Afghanistan or Beirut. You're not going. This thing is going to fall apart on potholes. You're going to want the Ram for that. But on the Silver Mirage, in another combat capacity, I'm seeing a guy like Shockwave from 1988 riding this. Somebody like Bulletproof or other members of the DEF. There's a sidecar. Heck, put Mutt or Law on it, on riding, and put their pooch in the sidecar. Have a little fun with it. Although I don't think Order or Junkyard are going to be firing off the cannon anytime soon. But you never know. I've seen some Paw Patrol episodes. Overall, like I said, because of the fragility of the toy, and also because it makes more sense in a tactical role rather than combat deployed role, I still prefer the Ram over the Silver Mirage. And because of the fragility of the toy, it's just something I'm glad I have for my collection, but I don't need more than one. I think the missiles fall off. I'm scared of breaking it, handling it. it's almost like one of those things that's kind of gives me a headache to own. But I like it because I like street bikes. I like motorcycles. I appreciate what they put out there, but I don't see combat infantry Joes hopping on this thing going to battle. I see Chuckles and Falcon going off on an assignment or go see their girlfriend, and that's how I see playing with this or displaying it. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of the Chaplain's Assistance Motor Pod. I've been your host, Gary, and you can find the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at Chaplain Joe Pod. Also, there are these well-dressed men behind me that are reminding me that this is part of the Pina Comics family, and you can find them at www.pinacomics.com. Now I've got to board my flight because I'm finally heading back to New York after all this world traveling. Thanks for joining me today. And with that, I'm going to leave you with a solid yojoe.